Hi everyone, and welcome to a reconfigured GFS gallery. I'm so excited about this video. So much to tell you. The main content of the video is going to be all about this complete system, all the equipment and all the methodologies that I use to achieve success with this aquarium. It's going to be like a sneak preview to my book as well, because the methodologies that I execute in this exact aquarium I talk about in the book, and you can replicate these kind of techniques in your own planted tanks and hopefully achieve success as well. Okay, so let's talk about the system in more detail. We'll talk about the equipment first, and then we'll talk about the methodologies behind achieving this successful aquarium. Okay, let's talk about the aquarium itself. This is the Evolution Aquascaper 1200. Big fan of these tanks. I actually helped collaborate with Evolution Aqua to come up with the designs for these a few years ago now. And they are a classic, what we call rimless aquarium. So there's no braces, there's no hood, there's no central bracing bar, there's no rims. It's just an open top tank. And these are perfect for aquascaping because you can see into the aquarium better. Obviously, if there's a hood, you can't actually physically see into it. You can have wood coming out the top like we've got there. You can have emergent plants, which we've actually got some limnophylla growing out the top now. So it offers a lot more kind of aesthetic interests. Disadvantages are that you'll get more water evaporation. There are reports of humidity causing issues in homes, although I've never experienced this in all my years of keeping open top tanks. You can get escaping fish and shrimp. My advice is to stock species which are less likely going to jump, and then provide lots of shelter and security through planting and hardscape to kind of encourage them to stay in the aquarium. For those with hoods, you have things like the Awase Highline, which I'm a huge fan of. I have my Malawi cichlids in there, and I do notice much less evaporation of water. The heater's not coming on as much because the heat's not escaping as well. That's another kind of difference that you might want to consider, especially if you live in a cold home. Another important aspect to this particular aquarium is its low iron glass. So glass naturally has an iron content. Most regular glass, which we call float glass, will actually appear like a green colour when you look down the cross section. You might be able to see on this one it's a light blue colour, and this is because it's much more transparent. And this is really important if you've got thicker glass. So this is actually 12mm glass. If this was float glass, it wouldn't look so clear. In fact, I was with Matt Eamon from Eamon Aquatics a couple of days ago, and he uses acrylic, which is even clearer than low iron glass, so that's something else to maybe consider in the future. We've also got clear silicone, and it's almost invisible. The whole kind of effect is to try to remove as much distraction as possible. So we've literally got a low iron glass box, and all your attention is drawn to the actual aquascape rather than the aquarium itself. If you imagine an old school aquarium, maybe even with black silicone, you've got a black hood on there, black background, it's not as pure or as kind of minimalist as this style of aquarium. So there we go, rimless tanks in a nutshell. There's some advantages, there's disadvantages. You take your choice, you pick your aquarium. Let's talk about the lighting. This is the Twinstar 1200 SA. It's a great light. I've been using it for months now on this system, and as you can see, it's growing the plants really well. In terms of its technical specification, it's adjustable. So it's 120 centimeters to 140 centimeters, an adjustment, and it will fit up to 12mm glass. It's 108 watts, which produces 6,400 lumens. So lumens is actually how bright the light appears to our eyes, rather than, it is a useful value to measure brightness, but not so useful to measure its capability of photosynthesizing. So I like to use PAR, or photosynthetically active radiation measurement. That's worth a video all on its own. I do discuss this more in my book. But it's a great light. Colour rendition is very, very good for plants. It does produce this kind of pinky purple tinge. It does have a strip running down the centre of the light unit, which is very kind of red, heavy, almost like a magenta. But you can see it's bringing out the colours of the limnophila really well. The colours of the fish look great. And it's a really good unit. I have this on 100% power for 8 hours a day. Now you can buy a third party, I think even Twinstar produce them now, a little kind of inline ramping device, which is programmable, which you can ramp up slowly the intensity, ramp it down, and you can also put your photo period in, or however you want that intensity. So maybe you want to run it on half power, which I always recommend for the beginning of an aquascape's life. I've used Kessels before. The Kessels are a very different light. They produce light from a point source, which results in the shimmer effect. And arguably the colour rendition isn't so rich. They probably look more natural, but they don't make the colours pop. In my experience, don't grow the plant so well. They're very different lights, so you pick your own according to your own taste. They're both relatively expensive. There are much cheaper ways to get light over your tank. Try not to get too confused, but this is a proven performer for me. I do like the Twinstar light units. Kessels as well have been good for me. My favourite light to see in action is the ADA Solar RGB, and if and when I do get my 60p set up, this is a light I'll be using over that more than likely. So that's the light. You know, we need good light to grow the plants. Too much light and you'll get algae. Not enough light and you won't promote enough plant health. The more light we have, the more plants will demand. So the more CO2 they'll need, the more nutrients they'll need through their leaves and potentially through their roots. So it's all about this kind of triangle of balance. So more light means more CO2 and more nutrients. If any one of those goes out of kilter, you end up with a struggling plant and potentially algae. A lot of it is down to your own experimentation, if you like. Most kit aquariums are supplied with light that will grow easy plants. So I like to refer to the Tropica website, and each plant has either easy, medium or advanced in their labelling system. You should be able to grow every easy plant in a regular kind of aquarium light. So consider this when you're first starting out aquascaping. Potentially just stick with the easy plants, especially if you don't want to use CO2 injection, lots of liquid fertilisers, or maybe even a soil. This light is capable of growing pretty much any plant I want. You can see the super healthy plant growth in here. The stems need trimming at the back, which we'll do in another video. Really happy with the light and happy to recommend it to anyone really, because it is a proven performer. Okay, let's talk about the substrate. The substrate is where the plants are anchored, and it also supplies nutrients to the plant roots, and it can also hold lots of beneficial bacteria. My favourite substrate is Tropica Aquarium soil, and I use this in pretty much all of my tanks and all of the tanks that I aquascape for clients as well. It's a proven performer. It supplies plenty of nutrients to the plant roots. It helps to soften the water slightly, doesn't need pre-rinsing, just a very easy product to work with and can really help achieve great plant growth. Soil maintenance is important, and what I like to do is just gently wave my hand above the plants, and this helps to lift any detritus, any waste organics, any excess accumulated detritus up into the water column, and then we can remove that as part of the water change. Now it's really important that we do the water change the last part of the maintenance process, because from the action of moving the plants around, moving the soil, you're going to lift up a load of waste organics into the water column. If that's not diluted via water change, it can trigger algae. So it's really important to do this water change right at the end. And I like to change at least 50% of my tank water every water change. So that's the basics of soil. You can use lots of different brands. ADA Aquasoil Amazonia is well known to be the most kind of nutrient rich, and it will give you the biggest ammonia spike. So a lot of soils will actually produce ammonia in their first few weeks after installation because it contains so much nitrogen. It's important that we don't obviously add any livestock during this ammonia spike, so you might be worth investing in an ammonia and nitrite test kit and only adding livestock once those are zero. Me personally, all I do is do large frequent water changes for the first 4 weeks or so, and then add livestock after that. The plant growth will use the nitrogen, and you can almost guarantee by that point the filter bacteria will have seeded itself from this ammonia as well. And this is the way I kind of cycle my tanks. I don't use the traditional fishless cycling technique with ammonia and test kits, etc. I rely on the large frequent water changes and the plant growth. Okay, we're inside the cabinet now. Let's talk about filtration and circulation. This is one of my favourite filters of all time, the Aquascape Biomaster 600 Thermo. Comes with a quick release pre-filter, which is a game changer. Can clean this filter in 2 minutes or so. And it comes with an inbuilt heater as well, which means you don't have to have an ugly heater inside the aquarium. German engineering, really reliable. I have replaced the supplied kind of grey tubes with clear hose. This looks great when it's connected to the glass inlet and outlet that I'm using, as opposed to the plastic fittings that are supplied. This is all part of the kind of using the rimless tank and the glassware to minimise the impact of any equipment. But great filter. I do like to aim for 5 to 10 times the tank's turnover per hour in terms of the filter rating. So let's say you have a 10-gallon aquarium, you want to be using a filter with at least 50 to 100 gallons per hour rating. Or let's say you have a 100-litre aquarium, you want to be using at least a filter with a 500 to 1,000 litres per hour rating. I am underrated on this aquarium. I did originally run 2 of these filters, but I thought I'd risk it and go for 1, and I've gotten away with it so far. Circulation is super important in planted tanks. We need to ensure that there's minimum dead spots in the aquarium. This is an area where algae can really grow. You can just get poor plant health. If you're injecting CO2, it's particularly important, so we need to get that CO2 actually around to that plant. So if you've not got any circulation in that area, it's not going to get much CO2. So this is why we go for those higher levels of circulation at 5 to 10 times tanks turnover per hour. Okay, let's talk about CO2 injection. CO2 is a very important source of carbon. So plants are about half carbon, about 40% made of carbon, and the plant needs carbon to grow. One of the best ways to introduce more carbon is to add CO2 injection. So we've got a pressurised system here. Pressurised systems are by far the best way to introduce extra CO2 into your aquarium. Forget so-called liquid CO2 fertilisers. These are nonsense. They don't actually contain any CO2 and are potentially harmful. So if you want to add CO2, invest in a decent CO2 system. I have done videos on how to set up pressurised CO2 kits, etc. So I won't go into too much detail, but we have a refillable cylinder here. I've got a really great regulator here. This is actually from Greenleaf Aquariums over in the States. They kindly sent this over to me maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. Absolutely epic, really reliable, not had any issues with this whatsoever. Comes with a solenoid as well and a bubble counter. Although I do use a separate bubble counter because I find that the bubbles come out so fast of this one. I've used a bubble counter with larger bubbles, so it's easier to count them basically. This also acts as a non-return valve as well, so we can physically count the CO2 coming out of here. It's off right now for filming. I'll just put it on right now. I've got it on a solenoid. It'll take a little while for the pressure to build up, and then you'll see the bubbles come out of there. And then this finally goes into a inline CO2 diffuser. So there's basically a ceramic tube in there. The CO2 gas penetrates the ceramic tube and then gets injected into the water that's flowing out of the filter. Then that CO2 rich water comes out into the aquarium. And actually you can see this tiny kind of CO2 microbubble mist that floats around the aquarium. And this is another good way to check your circulation, because if you can see that mist all over the tank, it means that you've got good circulation. It means those plants are able to use that CO2 as well. I'm running about 3 bubbles per second at the moment in this tank. Testing for CO2 is important. Too much CO2 will kill your fish. Not enough CO2, you won't get good plant growth. I normally aim for about 30 parts per million. There are a few ways you can test for this. CO2 drop checkers are very popular, but not the most reliable because you're relying on reading that colour, and everyone has a different kind of subjective kind of way they read colours. You can test the pH as well. There's loads of stuff online about how to test for CO2. It's just really important. Not too much, not too little, just the right amount. Normally between 20 and 30 parts per million is fine. So that's CO2 summarised, very quick rundown. It is a complex topic. I have done a complete video all on CO2 on its own, but just thought I'd give you an idea of what the system I use in this particular aquarium system. Okay, finally we've got liquid fertilisers. So this is Tropica Specialised Nutrition. This contains all of the nutrients that the plants need, and they take these nutrients through their leaves. Now I use an automatic doser here, so this is a pump, and it pumps out the liquid fertiliser, and then this goes into the tank. And I dose 20 millilitres of this every day. Now plants need food, and the best way to get food is through their leaves and through their roots, through the soil, but through their leaves they use the liquid fertiliser. If we don't add enough liquid fertiliser, we get pale growth, we get poorly plant growth, and this leads to algae. So it's really important that we add enough liquid fertilisers. Again, it's another complex topic. It's worth a complete video on its own. If it's something you're interested in, let me know, and it's something that I may be able to produce for you. Always add, in my experience, always add a little bit too much liquid fertiliser. Always better to add a bit too much and not enough. The plants will actually happily use up the extra. It's called luxury uptake. And then I like to do the weekly, at least a weekly large water change to reset those nutrient levels which are increasing through this daily addition of the liquid fertiliser. So there we go, quick rundown on liquid fertilisers and the system that I use, and it works really, really well. Okay, so that's everything covered inside the cabinet in terms of the technical equipment and the kind of methodologies that I use. Finally, I want to talk about plants. Now, if you've watched a lot of my videos, you'll know how I obviously love planted aquariums, but also why plants are so important. They provide oxygen, they remove harmful nutrients, they provide shelter and security for the fish, they help to prevent algae if you look after your plants properly. And I just think it really brings us closer to nature, having a planted aquarium. There's something really special about mixing up these natural materials, the wood and the rocks and the plants together, that create this overall aesthetic that looks so natural and just makes me feel more at peace. And you know, if I can, I'll always have a planted aquarium at home, and I always encourage people to try planted aquariums themselves if they want to get into the aquarium hobby. In terms of plants from a technical perspective, just some basic guidelines. Buy the healthiest plants you can. So have a word with your local retailer and find out when they get their next plant delivery, and buy them as fresh as possible. And buy loads of plants. Just get as many as you can afford, or as many as you can fit in your aquarium from the start. This is going to help prevent algae. The more plants we have, the better we look after those plants, and the healthier they are to start with, the more likely you're going to have success. Once you've got your plants in there, look after your plants properly in the longer term, maintain them properly. Give them good light, good CO2 if you're using CO2, a good substrate and good liquid fertilisers, and finally, good circulation. Follow that up with regular, frequent and large enough water changes to dilute any waste organics which can otherwise trigger algae. And that is pretty much it. It sounds quite simple. It is quite simple. And hopefully this video has given you some insights into how you can maybe achieve a successful planted aquarium yourselves if you're a beginner, or if you've already got a planted tank, maybe utilise some of these techniques in your own hobby and improve potentially. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. You take care. Keep on scaping. Cheerio.